It was meant to be the start of a perfect vacation. After 3 years of nonstop work at the hospital, handling complex brain surgeries and dealing with the pressures of being one of the youngest neurosurgeons in the city, Dr. Lai finally decided to treat herself to a first-class ticket to San Francisco. The morning started like any other travel day. She had arrived at Chicago O'Hare International Airport 2 hours early, breezed through security, and even had time to grab her favorite green tea latte. As she walked down the jet bridge, her carry-on rolling quietly behind her, she couldn't help but smile, thinking about the peaceful 5-hour flight ahead. Finally, a chance to actually relax, she thought, adjusting the comfortable navy blazer she had chosen for the flight. She had saved up specifically for this first-class ticket, wanting to start her vacation in style. Her colleagues had teased her about splurging, but after all those overnight shifts and emergency surgeries, she knew she deserved it. The plane's first-class cabin welcomed her with its soft lighting and that distinct new plane smell. She double-checked her boarding pass, seat 2A, a window seat with extra legroom. Perfect. As she approached her seat, she noticed how spacious it was, so different from her usual economy flights rushing to medical conferences. A flight attendant was organizing the overhead bins nearby. The name tag on her crisp blue uniform read Ms. Anderson. As Dr. Lai stepped toward her assigned seat, she noticed how Anderson's welcoming smile suddenly shifted to a tight-lipped frown. The flight attendant's eyes darted between Dr. Lai and the first-class seat number, then back again. "Good morning," Dr. Lai said warmly, used to putting nervous patients at ease. She started to place her small carry-on in the overhead bin. Anderson's voice cut through the ambient noise of boarding passengers. "Excuse me, are you sure you're in the right cabin?" The words came out sharp and loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Dr. Lee paused, her hand still on her suitcase. She'd dealt with assumptions and prejudices before, but something about Anderson's tone made her stomach tighten. Still, she kept her voice calm and professional. "Yes, I'm in 2A. Would you like to see my boarding pass?" She reached for her phone to show her mobile boarding pass, but Anderson had already stepped closer, her presence somehow blocking the way to the seat. "This section is first class," Anderson said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "Economy boarding hasn't started yet. You'll need to wait." A few other passengers had stopped their own boarding preparations to watch the scene unfold. Dr. Lai could feel their eyes on her, some curious, others uncomfortable. She took a deep breath, remembering all the times she had to keep her cool in the operating room during tense moments. "I understand this is first class," Dr. Lai replied, her voice steady but firm. "I purchased a first-class ticket. Here." She pulled up the boarding pass on her phone, the first-class seat assignment clearly visible. Instead of checking the boarding pass, Anderson crossed her arms. "There must be some mistake with the system. This seat is actually reserved." The lie was so transparent that someone in the row behind let out an audible scoff. Dr. Lai stood her ground, feeling her cheeks grow warm not from embarrassment, but from a familiar frustration. She'd worked too hard, saved too carefully, and planned this vacation too meticulously to let someone's prejudices derail the start of her much-needed break. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of an incident that would soon capture the attention of millions. The tension in the first-class cabin grew thicker by the second. Other passengers were still boarding, creating a steady stream of people who now slowed down to watch the scene unfolding between Dr. Lai and Ms. Anderson. The flight attendant's stance hadn't changed. She remained firmly planted in front of seat 2A, her arms crossed and her expression unyielding. "I don't understand," Dr. Lai said, keeping her voice steady despite her rising frustration. "I booked this seat months ago. I have the confirmation right here." She held up her phone again, but Anderson deliberately looked away, pretending to adjust something in the overhead bin. A businessman in a gray suit sitting in 2B lowered his newspaper and cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, but I've been sitting here since pre-boarding, and I saw the seat was empty. There's no reservation sign on it." Anderson's face flushed slightly, but she doubled down. "Sir, I appreciate your input, but there's been a mix-up with the booking system." She turned back to Dr. Lai. "We have a perfectly good seat available in economy. I'm sure you'll be comfortable there." That's when something unexpected happened. A young woman, a few rows back, pulled out her phone and started recording. "I'm sorry," she called out, "but I think everyone needs to see this. This isn't right." Other passengers began murmuring in agreement. An elderly couple exchanged concerned glances, and the wife whispered something to her husband, who nodded gravely. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted from uncomfortable observation to active disapproval of Anderson's behavior. Dr. Lai took another deep breath. Years of handling high-pressure situations in the operating room had taught her how to stay composed when others might lose their cool. "Ms. Anderson," she said calmly, "I understand you're doing your job, but I paid for this seat. I'm not moving to economy because you think I don't belong here." A few passengers actually applauded softly at this. Anderson's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "Are you refusing to comply with crew member instructions?" she asked, her voice taking on an official tone. "Because that could be grounds for removal from the flight." The businessman in 2B had enough. He stood up, his tall frame making Anderson take a step back. "Now wait just a minute," he said firmly. "You can't threaten a passenger who has a valid ticket. This is completely unprofessional." More phones came out, recording the incident. The young woman who first started filming spoke up again. "I've got the whole thing since you first approached her. Every single word." Anderson's eyes darted around the cabin, suddenly realizing how many witnesses were watching and recording her behavior. The confident authority in her stance began to waver slightly. I need to speak with the lead flight attendant," she said, her voice less certain now. "Yes, please do," Dr. Lai agreed quietly. "I think that would be best." As Anderson hurried toward the front of the plane, the businessman turned to Dr. Lai. "Don't worry," he said. "We all saw what happened here. I've flown over 1,000,000 miles, and I've never seen anything like this. She won't get away with it." Other passengers began offering words of support. A college student a row behind handed Dr. Lai a bottle of water. "My mom's a doctor too," she said softly. "This shouldn't happen to anyone." The elderly couple who had been watching everything unfold nodded in agreement. "We're right here if you need any witnesses, dear," the wife offered. "Times may have changed, but clearly some people haven't changed with them." Dr. Lai sat down in her rightful seat, her heart racing despite her calm exterior. She could hear Anderson's voice at the front of the plane, growing increasingly defensive as she spoke with someone. This wasn't how she had imagined starting her vacation, but something told her this incident was far from over. Little did Anderson know, her discriminatory actions were about to spark a chain of events that would reach far beyond this flight. Within minutes, the lead flight attendant appeared, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her name tag reading Mrs. Rivera. She carried herself with the kind of authority that comes from decades of experience. Behind her, Anderson followed, her earlier confidence now replaced with visible nervousness. "Ma'am," Rivera addressed Dr. Lai directly, "I understand there's been some confusion about your seating assignment. May I see your boarding pass?" Her tone was professional and courteous, a stark contrast to Anderson's earlier behavior. Dr. Lai showed her phone, displaying the mobile boarding pass. Rivera glanced at it briefly and nodded. "Everything appears to be in order here. This is absolutely your assigned seat." She turned to Anderson, who was now studying the carpet intently. "Ms. Anderson, please assist with the remaining economy boarding." But before Anderson could leave, the businessman who had spoken up earlier raised his hand. "Excuse me, but I don't think this should be swept under the rug. What happened here wasn't just confusion, it was blatant discrimination." The young woman who had been recording spoke up again. I have the whole thing on video. She didn't even check the ticket before telling her to go to economy. Other passengers nodded in agreement, and someone added, she tried to intimidate her by threatening removal from the flight. Rivera's expression remained professional, but her eyes narrowed slightly as she turned to Anderson. We'll address this situation properly after the flight. For now, please proceed to economy boarding. Anderson hurried away, her face flushed with embarrassment. The college student who had given Dr. Lai water earlier raised her hand. I've already posted a short clip on social media. People need to know this still happens. She showed her phone screen, where the video had already gathered hundreds of views in just minutes. Rivera looked concerned but maintained her composure. Dr. Lai, on behalf of the airline, I sincerely apologize for this incident. I want you to know we take these matters very seriously. Would you be willing to speak with our customer relations team after we land? They'll want to address this properly. Dr. Lai nodded, still processing everything that had happened. Yes, I think that would be appropriate. She paused, then added, I just wanted to start my vacation. I never expected. None of us did, dear, the elderly woman from the nearby row chimed in. She turned to Rivera. My husband and I are executive platinum members, and we've never seen such unprofessional behavior. We'll be filing formal complaints as well. The businessman pulled out his business card and handed it to Dr. Lai. I'm actually an employment lawyer. Here's my card. Not that you'll need it, but just in case. What happened here was textbook discrimination. Rivera was taking mental notes of everything, clearly understanding the severity of the situation. I'll be personally overseeing the service in first class today, she assured everyone. And Dr. Lai, I'll make sure you have my contact information before we land. As the final boarding announcements were made, passengers continued sharing their contact information with Dr. Lai. The young woman with the viral video showed her the comments already pouring in. This is unacceptable. Stand your ground. Thank you for recording this. Dr. Lai sat back in her seat, the one she had rightfully booked, and tried to process everything that had happened. What started as a simple start to her vacation had turned into something much bigger. She could hear other passengers still discussing the incident, their voices a mix of anger and support. The plane began its final preparations for takeoff, but this story was far from over. In fact, it was about to reach heights that nobody on board could have predicted, especially Ms. Anderson, who had no idea that her actions would soon become a national talking point about discrimination in the airline industry. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the situation in first class had settled into an uneasy calm. Mrs. Rivera, true to her word, was personally handling the service with practiced grace and professionalism. Meanwhile, down in economy, passengers who had witnessed Anderson's behavior during boarding were spreading the story through whispered conversations. Would you like a hot towel, Dr. Lee? Rivera asked, her genuine warmth a stark contrast to the earlier confrontation. As she leaned closer to offer the towel, she spoke quietly. Our head purser would like to speak with you when it's convenient. He's been informed of the situation. The head purser, Mr. Thompson, appeared moments later. His gray uniform was crisp, and his manner was both professional and concerned. Dr. Lai, may I have a moment of your time? He asked, gesturing to an empty seat nearby where they could speak privately. They moved to the vacant row, and Thompson spoke in low, measured tones. I've been briefed about the incident, and I've already contacted our ground team. They're taking this very seriously. In fact, our regional director will be meeting us at the gate in San Francisco. The college student who had posted the video leaned forward from her seat. Sir, you should know the video has gone viral. It's already got over 50,000 views, and people are tagging the airline. Thompson nodded gravely. Yes, our social media team has already flagged it. They're monitoring the situation closely. He turned back to Dr. Lai. We want you to know that this behavior goes against everything our airline stands for. Just then, a flight attendant from economy came to speak with Thompson. Her whispered message made his eyebrows rise. It seems, he said to Dr. Lai, that several passengers in economy have also filed complaints through our airline's app. They witnessed everything during boarding. The businessman in 2B, who had been typing on his laptop, spoke up again. I've just emailed my company's travel department. We book thousands of flights annually with your airline, and they'll want to know about this. Thompson's concern visibly deepened. I'd assure you, this will be addressed at the highest levels. Ms. Anderson has been removed from cabin duties for the remainder of the flight. She'll be met by HR representatives when we land. The elderly couple who had supported Dr. Lai earlier were now sharing their own story. You know, the wife said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. We've been flying for over 40 years, and we've seen how things have changed. But this shows we still have a long way to go. As Thompson returned to his duties, Dr. Lai checked her phone during the approved Wi-Fi period. Her inbox was flooding with messages from people who had seen the viral video. Support was pouring in from all over: medical colleagues, civil rights groups, and countless strangers who were outraged by what they'd witnessed. The young woman who had recorded the video showed Dr. Lai the latest update. Look at this. News outlets are starting to pick up the story. They're requesting permission to use the video. The view count had now crossed 100,000, and the comments section was filled with similar stories from other passengers who had faced discrimination. Mrs. Rivera returned with fresh drinks for the first-class cabin. As she served Dr. Lai her requested green tea, she said quietly, "Just so you know, our CEO's office has been notified. This isn't going away quietly." Looking out the window at the endless blue sky, Dr. Lai thought about how differently this flight had turned out from what she'd planned. Her peaceful start to vacation had turned into something much more significant. But maybe, she thought, some vacations were meant to be about more than just rest. Unknown to everyone on board, this incident was about to become more than just another viral video. It would spark a conversation that would force airlines across the country to confront an uncomfortable truth about bias in the skies. And for Ms. Anderson, the next few hours would be the longest of her career. 2 hours into the flight, the story had taken on a life of its own. The video, now shared millions of times, had sparked a nationwide conversation. In the first-class cabin, Dr. Li's phone kept buzzing with notifications until she had to turn them off to maintain her peace of mind. The college student who had recorded the video moved to an empty seat nearby, with Mrs. Rivera's permission. "You won't believe this," she whispered, showing Dr. Lai her phone. "Major news networks are covering it. They're calling it first-class discrimination. People are sharing their own stories in the comments." The businessman, who had been making calls during the Wi-Fi approved periods, put down his phone and leaned over. "My firm's PR team just reached out. They're offering to handle your media responses pro bono if you need it. Stories like this need to be heard." Mrs. Rivera appeared with a fresh round of drinks, her manner remaining professionally warm. "Dr. Lai, our ground team has updated me. They've arranged for a private lounge at arrival where you can meet with airline representatives away from the media. Apparently, several news crews are already waiting at the airport." The elderly couple who had witnessed everything shared a knowing look. "Back in our day," the husband said, "these things got swept under the rug. At least now, with social media, people can't hide from their actions anymore." Down in economy, where Ms. Anderson had been relegated to basic drink service, passengers were still watching her every move. Some filmed her quietly, while others just shook their heads. The tension was palpable every time she passed through the cabin. The young woman checked her phone again. "Look at this. People are starting to boycott the airline. Their stock is actually dropping." She scrolled through more comments. But others are praising how quickly the other staff responded and how they're handling it. Dr. Lai sipped her tea thoughtfully. "I never wanted all this attention," she said quietly. "I just wanted to start my vacation." The elderly woman reached over and patted her hand. Sometimes, dear, we don't choose our moments. They choose us. Mr. Thompson, the head purser, returned with updates. Our CEO has issued a public statement condemning discrimination and promising immediate action. They're launching a full investigation. He paused, looking genuinely concerned. The videos have also reached our international routes. We're getting responses from all over the world. A flight attendant from economy came to speak privately with Thompson, but everyone could see the concern on their faces. Apparently, some passengers were refusing to be served by Anderson, requesting other flight attendants instead. The businessman checked his emails one last time before the final descent. The story's reaching corporate circles now. Several major companies are reviewing their airline partnerships. This could lead to real change in company policies. Mrs. Rivera brought Dr. Lai a warm cookie, a small gesture of kindness in the midst of the chaos. You know, she said softly, I've been flying for 25 years. Sometimes it takes one person standing their ground to make others realize what's been wrong all along. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Dr. Lai looked out at the golden California sunset. What had started as a simple confrontation had grown into something much larger. Her phone had hundreds of unread messages, including interview requests from major networks and supportive notes from medical colleagues across the country. The college student showed her one last update before landing. People are calling you the first-class doctor. You're trending nationwide. She smiled warmly. Sometimes the best vacations aren't about where you go, but what you stand for along the way. Little did anyone know, but this flight was about to land in more ways than one. The gathered media, waiting airline executives, and Ms. Anderson's impending meeting with HR were just the beginning of changes that would ripple through the entire airline industry. As the plane touched down in San Francisco, the usual rush to grab bags and phones was replaced by a strange tension. Through the windows, passengers could see an unusual number of people waiting near the gate, some holding professional cameras and microphones. Dr. Lee, Mr. Thompson approached quietly. We'll be doing a special deplaning process. The regional director and our PR team are waiting in the jet bridge. Would you prefer to exit first or last? Before she could answer, the college student who had recorded the video gasped. Oh wow, the video just hit 10 million views. And look at this, 3 major airlines just posted statements about updating their anti-discrimination policies. The businessman gathered his briefcase, handing Dr. Lai another card. My firm's Civil Rights Division would like to speak with you. Not just about this case, but about creating better airline industry standards. Your experience could help change things. Mrs. Rivera made one final announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated until we complete priority deplaning. Her voice was steady, but everyone knew this wasn't a normal arrival procedure. Down in economy, passengers were still filming Ms. Anderson, who sat quietly in the back galley, her face pale and drawn. Someone had discovered her previous passenger complaints online, and the story was growing bigger by the minute. The elderly couple stood slowly, the wife turning to Dr. Lai. We changed our minds about heading straight to our hotel. We'd like to stay and give statements about what we saw. Some things are more important than convenience. Through the windows, they could see airline executives in suits gathering. The regional director, a tall woman wearing a crisp blazer, looked both concerned and determined. Behind her, PR representatives were already handling the growing crowd of reporters. The company's stock has dropped 3% since takeoff, the businessman noted, checking his phone. Corporate headquarters just announced an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. As the deplaning began, Dr. Lai felt the weight of everyone's eyes on her. The college student showed her one last social media update. People across the country were sharing their own stories of discrimination during travel, using the hashtag #firstclassquality. In the jet bridge, the regional director stepped forward. Dr. Lai, I'm deeply sorry for your experience. We have a private room prepared, away from the media, where we can discuss this properly. She glanced at her tablet. Our CEO is on a video call waiting to speak with you personally. The other passengers filed past, many stopping to share their contact information or offer words of support. The elderly couple, true to their word, stayed behind to give their statements. The businessman was already on his phone, discussing the incident with his law firm's partners. Through the terminal windows, more news vans were arriving. The airline's PR team was trying to manage the situation, but the story had grown beyond their control. Social media had turned a single act of discrimination into a national conversation about equality in the skies. Your original return flight has been upgraded to first class, the regional director added, though I completely understand if you prefer to fly with another airline. Dr. Lai looked at her phone one last time before following the director. There were messages from medical associations, civil rights groups, and even a few celebrities who had shared the video. Her quiet vacation had turned into something she never expected, a moment that might actually change things. As they walked through the terminal, other travelers began to recognize her from the viral video. Some nodded in support, others took photos, but everyone knew they were witnessing something important. This wasn't just about one flight attendant's actions anymore. It had become a movement. And somewhere in the airport, Ms. Anderson was being escorted to a private meeting that would determine not just her future, but potentially the future of how airlines handle discrimination. The story was far from over, and its ripples would soon turn into waves of change throughout the entire aviation industry. The next morning, the airline's corporate headquarters was buzzing with activity. The boardroom, usually quiet until regular business hours, was already filled by 6 a.m. Emergency meetings had been going on since midnight, with executives joining from different time zones. The video had now reached 20 million views, and the story was leading morning news broadcasts across the country. In the privacy of a downtown San Francisco hotel suite provided by the airline, Dr. Lai watched as reporters discussed her experience. "We have to address this head-on," the airline's CEO said during an emergency press conference. His usually confident demeanor was replaced by genuine concern. "What happened on that flight goes against everything we stand for. We're not just promising change, we're taking immediate action." Meanwhile, in another part of the building, Ms. Anderson sat through a tense HR meeting. The stack of previous complaints on the table told a troubling story. This wasn't an isolated incident. Other passengers had come forward with similar experiences, though none had gained this much attention. The college student who recorded the video was being interviewed by a morning show. "I couldn't just sit there and let it happen," she explained. "Sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even if it makes you uncomfortable." Back at the hotel, Dr. Lee's phone rang. It was the businessman from the flight. "The airline's legal team reached out to my firm," he explained. "They want to work with civil rights organizations to overhaul their training programs. They're serious about fixing this." Social media continued to explode with support. Flight attendants from other airlines started sharing their own stories about witnessing discrimination. Hashtag first class equality had become more than a hashtag. It was turning into a movement for change in the airline industry. The elderly couple had given interviews to 3 different news stations. "We've been flying for decades," the wife told reporters. "The problem isn't new, but maybe now people will finally pay attention and do something about it." By midday, the airline announced its first round of changes. Effective immediately, the CEO declared, "We're implementing mandatory monthly anti-bias training for all staff. We're also creating a passenger advocacy board to review complaints and suggest policy changes." Ms. Anderson's fate was sealed by early afternoon. After reviewing all the evidence, including the viral video and past complaints, the airline terminated her employment. But they didn't stop there. They also announced a complete review of all discrimination complaints from the past 5 years. The airline's competitors took notice. By sunset, 2 other major carriers had announced similar training programs and policy reviews. The industry was frantically trying to get ahead of the story, worried they might face similar scrutiny. Dr. Lai received an unexpected call from a civil rights organization. "Your experience has opened a lot of eyes," the representative said. "Would you consider being part of a task force to develop new industry-wide standards?" The college student's video had sparked conversations in unexpected places. Flight schools added cultural sensitivity training to their curriculum. Corporate travel departments started asking airlines about their anti-discrimination policies before booking contracts. Mrs. Rivera, the lead flight attendant who had handled the situation professionally, was invited to help develop the new training programs. "Sometimes it takes one incident to show us where we need to improve," she told her colleagues during a staff meeting. As evening approached, Dr. Lai finally had a moment to herself. Her planned vacation had turned into something much bigger, a catalyst for change in an industry that desperately needed it. Looking out over the San Francisco skyline, she realized that sometimes the most important journeys aren't about the destination, but about the changes they inspire along the way. The day was ending, but the impact of that flight was just beginning to take shape. Airlines across the country were about to learn an expensive but necessary lesson. In the age of social media, accountability couldn't be pushed off to another day. 1 week after the incident, the airline industry was going through its biggest transformation in years. The original airline's boardroom had become a hub of activity, with experts from civil rights organizations, customer advocacy groups, and airline policymakers working together on comprehensive changes. "Look at this," the college student texted Dr. Lai, sharing a news update. Airlines across the country were competing to announce the most progressive anti-discrimination policies. What started as one incident had sparked an industry-wide revolution. The businessman who had witnessed everything was now leading his law firm's task force on airline industry reform. "We're seeing something unprecedented," he told a news reporter. "Companies aren't just making promises, they're putting real money and resources into fixing the problem." Inside the airline's training center, Mrs. Rivera was helping develop new training videos. "We're completely changing how we teach customer service," she explained to a room full of trainee flight attendants. "Every passenger deserves respect, no matter their appearance or background." The elderly couple's story had gone viral too. Their interview, where they compared air travel across different decades, had struck a chord with viewers. "Change doesn't just happen," the wife had said. "Sometimes it needs a push, and sometimes that push comes from unexpected places." The airline's new passenger advocacy board held its first meeting, with Dr. Lai as a special advisor. "We're not just looking at individual incidents," the board chairman explained. "We're examining the whole culture of air travel and how we can make it truly inclusive." In a surprise move, other transport industries started following suit. Train companies, bus lines, and cruise ships began reviewing their own policies. "The ripple effect has been amazing," a transport industry analyst noted. "Nobody wants to be the next viral video." Back in Chicago, Dr. Lee's hospital colleagues had organized a committee to address discrimination in healthcare settings. "You inspired us," the chief of surgery told her. "If airlines can make such big changes so quickly, why can't we do the same in medicine?" The video that started it all had now been viewed over 50 million times. Schools were using it in training programs, and corporate HR departments shared it during sensitivity workshops. Even police academies had incorporated it into their bias training sessions. During a conference call with airline executives, the businessman shared some surprising statistics. Since implementing the new policies, customer satisfaction scores have actually improved across all passenger demographics. Turns out, treating everyone with respect is good for business. Mrs. Rivera received a promotion to head of flight attendant training. "We're not just teaching service anymore," she explained during a staff meeting. "We're teaching awareness, empathy, and genuine respect for every person who steps on our planes." The college student who recorded the video was invited to speak at her university's business ethics class. "One person standing up for what's right can make a difference," she told the students. "But when everyone stands together, that's when real change happens." Dr. Lai finally got to take her vacation, 2 weeks later than planned, but with an upgraded lifetime airline status. As she sat in first class on her rescheduled flight, she noticed something different. The atmosphere was warmer, more welcoming. Flight attendants were making a visible effort to treat every passenger with the same level of respect. A month after the incident, the airline industry reported its lowest number of discrimination complaints in history. The new training programs were working, and passengers were noticing the difference. It's not perfect yet, an industry watchdog noted, but we're seeing real progress. As evening settled over the country's airports, thousands of flights took off and landed safely. In each one, passengers of all backgrounds sat where they had booked, served by flight attendants who had gone through the new training. The skies were becoming a more equal place, one flight at a time. And somewhere in San Francisco, Dr. Lai looked at her phone one last time before bed. The latest news showed more airlines adopting the changes her experience had inspired. Sometimes, she thought, the most important journeys aren't the ones we plan, but the ones that plan themselves. 6 months after the incident that changed the airline industry, Dr. Lai stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing a room full of transportation officials and airline executives. Her story had become a turning point in the fight against discrimination in air travel. When I booked that first-class ticket, she began, I was just looking forward to a quiet vacation. Instead, I found myself at the center of a movement for change. But real change doesn't come from one person. It comes from everyone who decides to stand up and say, this isn't right. In the audience, familiar faces smiled back at her. The college student who recorded the video was there, now working as a social media consultant for airlines, helping them build more inclusive marketing campaigns. The businessman had brought his entire legal team, fresh from helping draft new industry-wide anti-discrimination policies. The elderly couple who had witnessed everything sat in the front row. They had become unofficial spokespersons for passenger rights, sharing their decades of travel experiences to help shape new policies. We never thought we'd be doing this in our retirement, the wife often joked, but some causes are worth the extra effort. Mrs. Rivera, now the National Director of Flight Attendant Training, presented the results of the new programs. In just 6 months, discrimination complaints have dropped by 85%. But more importantly, our staff report feeling better equipped to serve all passengers with respect and dignity. The changes had spread beyond airlines. Hotels, restaurants, and other service industries had started adopting similar training programs. The first-class doctor incident, as it became known in corporate circles, had become a case study in how to handle discrimination and create meaningful change. The college student's video, now part of training materials nationwide, had sparked a trend of accountability. People aren't afraid to speak up anymore, she explained during a panel discussion, and companies are learning that doing the right thing is good for business. Even Ms. Anderson's story had taken an unexpected turn. After losing her job, she had gone through intensive sensitivity training and now spoke at industry events about her experience and the importance of confronting personal biases. I had to face some hard truths about myself, she admitted in a recent interview. Sometimes it takes hitting rock bottom to realize you need to change. The airline had kept its promises. Their new passenger advocacy board, with Dr. Lai as a permanent member, met monthly to review policies and suggest improvements. Other airlines had followed suit, creating their own oversight committees and training programs. The businessman stood up to share some numbers. Airline profits are up, customer satisfaction is at an all-time high, and employment diversity has increased by 40%. Turns out, doing the right thing can also be good for the bottom line. Dr. Lai concluded her speech by announcing a new scholarship program, funded by the airline, for students from underrepresented backgrounds interested in aviation careers. This isn't just about preventing discrimination, she explained. It's about creating a future where everyone feels welcome in every part of the sky. As the conference ended, reporters gathered to ask about the lasting impact of that fateful flight. The elderly couple summed it up best. Sometimes the worst moments bring out the best changes. This wasn't just about one incident or one airline. It was about changing the way we treat each other, in the air and on the ground. Back at her hospital, Dr. Lee's story had inspired changes in healthcare too. Her colleagues had implemented new anti-bias training, ensuring every patient received equal care regardless of their background. That evening, as she boarded another flight home, Dr. Lai noticed something different in the air. First class, economy, and everywhere in between, there was a new sense of respect and dignity. Flight attendants greeted everyone with genuine warmth, and passengers from all walks of life felt equally welcome. The incident that could have ruined her vacation had instead created a legacy of positive change. As the plane took off into the sunset, Dr. Lai smiled, knowing that sometimes the most important journeys aren't about where we're going, but about how we help others along the way.